Welcome back. I'm Janet with Purl Together, and in this week's video, we're going to talk about the Intarsia square for the Berroco mystery blanket knit along. This block I found to be a little bit tedious just because you are switching colors and this over that and twisting stuff around, but overall it's a pretty simple concept and it's an easy knit. I mean, the block didn't take me very long at all to knit. I just found it a little bit tedious, but that's kind of Intarsia in general, and you just have to accept that some of it is going to be, this yarn over that yarn and just yarn ball management, or bobbins if you choose. I'm going to put a link to Alison Green's tutorial video for Intarsia down below in the video description. She chose to put each of the three colors on little bobbins and do it that way, and she shows how she did that. I chose not to because you just have three separate colors, and so I just kept them in the cakes and did it that way. If I would have had like the same color on each end of the block, where then I would have had to have made a choice to either have the yarn coming off the outside for one side of the block and off the inside for the other side of the block, and then that would have been a tangled up mess. So I would have made an extra cake or bobbin in that event. So there definitely are times when you need a bobbin or a length of yarn. I heard it said once in a class that I took that the famous designer Cafe Facet, he didn't prefer to use bobbins either, and he would just use, like a yard or a length, an arm's length of yarn, and then just when that ran out, he would just join more. So as always, you're the boss of your knitting. Do what works best for you, and don't let anybody tell you that it's wrong. There's no wrong. There's no knitting police. You do what works best for you. Okay, so let's get started with this Intarsia block. All right, the instructions indicate that we need to knit 4 rows of stockinette after the cast on, and then the first row of the chart is all color 3. So now I'm on row 2 of our Intarsia chart, and I'm about to join in my color number 1. And so for me, that's just 1 stitch of the white. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you can do the bobbins. I'm just going to try to manage my cakes of yarn. They're not huge. This one's a smaller cake. So I may wish I had made bobbins, and if I need to do that later, I will. But I'm just going to go in and hold my tails back together and knit that first stitch. So there's my 1. And then I'm going in underneath to begin my second stitch. So the old yarn needs to be on top. Let me arrange the tail. The old yarn is on top and the other one comes up from underneath. And we're just going to go ahead and go knit all the way across our row. And this will become more clear as we go along. But you want to remember the old yarn on top. Old. So I like to remember things that are alliterations, where you have the same starting letter. So old is over. The old yarn goes over the new yarn, and the new yarn is coming up from underneath. So we want to make this as tidy as we can, and we'll tighten things up, and I'll show you how that's going to look, how we can tighten things up on the backside as we go to make sure that all your stitches, you don't have an enlarged stitch or one that's pulled too tight. We can adjust that as we go on with our rows. So I'll show you my preference with that. So I'll just go ahead and knit all the way across this. All right, I've knitted all the way across, and now I'm going to bring in my third color, which is color number 2, but it's the third color in this row. So it's color number 2. We're going to bring this in, and again, we want the old yarn over the new yarn. So I will take my old yarn to the left, and then the new yarn is going to come up from underneath. And then what happens then is that the old yarn is trapped underneath. So I've just done that 1 stitch there. When you're reading the chart, you're going from right to left the same way as you knit, but then you're going to go up 1 row and back the other way because you're turning your work. Now we have row 3 on the wrong side, and we want 2 of these gray ones, which will be different if you're using a different color palette. So I'm just going to go ahead and go in and knit my purl. I'm purling on the back side now, purling these two. And again, the old yarn goes over the new yarn. So old yarn goes over the new yarn, and the new yarn is the brown that's going to come up from underneath. So, whoops. The old yarn, which is the gray, goes over to the left, and the new yarn comes up from underneath. So we can tighten this tail a little bit here, and the new yarn comes up from underneath. And I'm just going to hold this yarn to the left with my thumb and go ahead and start purling with the new yarn and purl your way back across until we get to the 2 white stitches that I need, or whatever color that is for you, on the other end of row 3. Okay, I'm at the end of row 3 and I just have 2 stitches left. So again, old yarn goes on top, the new yarn coming up from underneath. Be sure not to get your tail. You don't want that. You can use that to tighten that up a little bit. Old yarn goes up on top, new yarn comes in from underneath. Because when you do this purl stitch, that's going to trap that old yarn in there. And you'll see. And now, when we're finished with the row, go ahead and snug this up. Snug that up and make sure everything is nice and even and tidy, so you can pull on those tails a little bit. Snug this one up as well. Snug up the, snug everything up so that it looks nice and tidy and all your stitches are a uniform size. Let's go back and check and do that on this end as well. So we just want to tighten these up and make sure that everything is tidy. And that will help everything look better on the other side, on the right side of your work. Okay, so now we're at the beginning of row 4, and we're still using the white yarn. And part of Intarsia is just yarn management, and it does require untangling things after every row. And you know what? That's just part of it. Whether you're using bobbins or you're not using bobbins, it's all just, being diligent about untangling things. And that's totally fine. It's just part of it. So now I'm at the beginning of row 4, and I want 3 white stitches. And then we will switch back. So there's 3. So the old yarn goes on top. The old yarn goes over after I untangle this. Okay. The old yarn goes over to the left. The new yarn comes up from underneath. And you'll notice that this tightens up the stitch that's down here where that brown is coming from. It's from the row below, and that's okay. You just don't want to tighten it too much and put, make a stitch down here inordinately small. Everything just needs to be as uniform as you can. So now is when it comes in super handy that Berroco gave us a chart that has the stitch count numbers inside, so you can tell how many stitches are in each row. So that's pretty neat. So I have 51 stitches, but I'm not counting them. I just know that I'm going to go until I have 3 left. When you get to the point where the stitches are more even, like say on row 18, you can tell that there's 16 white ones, and then they've given you 25 blue ones. You see the numbers indicating the number of stitches of each color in that row. I thought that was very thoughtful of them to include that. All right, again, I'm to the last 3 stitches, so I want to change to the gray, and I'm going to take the brown yarn, the old yarn, over the top, bring up the gray, not the tail. Be mindful of that tail that you don't knit with it. I don't know how many times I've done that, and just begin knitting with the gray. And that, you can tell, is how that brown yarn gets trapped behind. By trapped, I mean just secured by you're bringing this yarn up. So we'll just knit these last 3. Then turn your work. And again, after each row, I like to go in and just, tug on things here and there, make sure my stitches are all uniform and look nice. Now I'm on row 5, so I need 4 of my color 2. 3, and then here's that gap. 4. Old yarn goes on top. New yarn comes up from underneath, and it goes over this and traps it in. That's the point. Since we closed that gap, you'll have some enlarged stitches. You can see that, so we're going to tug that. And I usually do this at the end of the row, but I just want you to see what happens when we, kind of straighten everything out and make that tidy. Make sure all the stitches are the same size. And we're just going to purl back and do the same thing. So I'm going to carry on and knit a bunch of this, maybe until we get to the middle of the block, and you can kind of see how things are looking. The other thing I want you to take notice of, though, is that there are a couple of places in your chart where it's not just one stitch over, like a zigzag 45 degree. For example, if you look at rows 12 and 13, that is the same stitch count of each color. And so those are stacked one on top of each other, not offset like it has been in previous rows. So just be careful. All right, I'm well into this square. In fact, I probably have about 20 rows until I'm finished, but let's take a look overall here. You can see that this point of this triangle is not as crisp as I might like it to be, but that's simply because this top stitch that's here has kind of been pushed over to the right a little bit. So I can manipulate that later on by adjusting the length of this tail, and then also by taking a needle or a tapestry, another knitting needle or a tapestry needle, and just kind of adjusting the length of these loops. And you can see that that needs to be done here. I need to just go even out my tension with my wraps, when I have the old yarn going over the top of the new yarn. And that's easy enough to do. And I'll do that before I block this square, is kind of go even everything out and make sure I don't have any enlarged stitches anywhere that need to be adjusted. Like this one's a little bit large, so I'll probably go and take care of that by redistributing some excess yarn on the backside. Okay, I'm pretty happy with how this is turning out. I do need to still do a couple of stockinette rows back and forth because I need the length. I need this to be 12 by 12. And also, when we began, we had, I believe there were 5 rows down here before we started the point of this particular triangle. So ideally, I would like for the bottom to match the top. So I will knit back and forth another few rows in order to make that happen, and then just do, then I just do a standard bind off. So the only other thing I want to mention is on the back, when I get ready to weave in these ends, like I need to go and use my darning needle or this needle here and, tighten up that stitch that got split by just evening that out with distribution here, cat hair. And then I'm also going to weave in my ends appropriately, bringing this tail back over to the color that it matches, and then I'll use a duplicate stitch, and it won't be visible on the front side. So just be mindful when you're weaving in your ends to use your duplicate stitch so it's not visible. Okay, so I'm really liking this blanket so far. It's a really good skill builder, as we've mentioned. I haven't done a lot of Intarsia before, so it was a good refresher for me as well. And again, if you have any little places that are imperfect, just turn your work over, manage those stitches, a little less here, a little more there. You can even stuff out. Blocking absolutely helps. And I mentioned that at the end of the tutorial segment about the yarn blooming. Yarn that has acrylic blooms a little less than yarn that is all animal or plant fiber. But nevertheless, you'll still notice a little bit of a difference. I found that my block turned out to be kind of large on the larger end. It's still within that inch parameter of, it's all going to mash together and work out just fine. So don't stress too much. But I did use US size 8, which I think is what the pattern indicates. So excellent. All right, I will see you next month for more block squares, and next week's video is going to be my wrap up for the Ida Luna shawl. And as I mentioned before, if you have finished the Ida Luna shawl, go post a photo on the Purl Together Ravelry group and be entered to win the grand prize. So I'll do the drawing on April 1st. For real, no fooling. All right, I hope you're having a good week, and thanks for watching.